On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, Day 156. Responding to the pressure from Qatar, Ismail Haniyeh, the external leader of Hamas, states that a ceasefire could start tomorrow if Israel would agree to the movement's terms of an IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and complete freedom of movement for Palestinians. Salem Jadua Abu Awad, an operative of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was assassinated in an airstrike today against his car in the town of Rafah. Equipment is already being unloaded in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in preparation for establishing the pier and a maritime humanitarian aid corridor. Barrages of over 70 rockets and missiles were fired from Lebanon towards different targets in northern Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu answers President Biden's criticism, says that the majority of Israelis support his policies and categorically rejecting the establishment of a Palestinian state. Hello everyone. I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of March 10th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 11th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation. After yesterday I reported that Qatar has threatened to expel the Hamas leadership from the country if a deal is not reached, today Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's external leader who resides in Qatar, stated in a message that he put out, and I quote, "It is the occupation and the enemy Zionist government's fault that no deal has been reached." He added that since the beginning of the negotiations, the movement has set 5 principles for the terms, including complete ceasefire, IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, complete freedom of movement in Gaza, increasing humanitarian aid entering Gaza, and a prisoner exchange. He added that while Hamas will not accept a deal that does not include the ending of the war, if the movement receives a clear indication that Israel is prepared to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and allow freedom of movement within the Strip, Hamas is willing to complete the negotiations within the next 24 hours. While the statement clearly is trying to place the blame on Israel, and is in fact trying to show that Hamas is being flexible and willing to come to a deal even within the next 24 hours, it's important to note that he is not actually stating anything different than was already transmitted in Hamas's response to the Paris summit already several weeks ago, in which the movement stated that they're not willing to continue negotiations unless Israel preemptively accepts a complete idea of withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and complete freedom of movement for Palestinians to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Other news related to the hostage situation. Egypt reported today that it has made contact with both the Mossad and Hamas in the last 24 hours in order to begin redeveloping the negotiations during the month of Ramadan. According to the report, Egypt wanted to assess each side's position and begin formulating how to bring them back to the negotiating table after the deadlines for achieving a deal before Ramadan clearly have not been reached since Ramadan is starting tonight. In fact, Egypt is trying to say how are they going to redevelop negotiations now during the month of Ramadan. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, al-Qassam brigades reported carrying out sniping fire against IDF soldiers in the Tel al-Halawa neighborhood of Gaza City. There were no reports in the IDF about people who were injured or killed in this attack. However, the fact that al-Qassam was reporting this activity in Tel al-Halawa tells us a little bit about the amount of IDF forces that are in the area, even though the IDF is not actually carrying out a specific operation in that part of Gaza City. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, local reports stated that there were bombings in the al-Nuseirat refugee camp and that a fire broke out in a market as a result. In addition, a telecommunications failure was noted in the area. According to some reports, this was as a result of damaged infrastructure. However, telecommunications in different parts of the Gaza Strip have failed prior to IDF incursions into certain areas. Right now, there's no report of any IDF activity specifically going into al-Nuseirat refugee camp. However, it's important to note that should any activity develop in the coming days. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Han Yunis is continued IDF operations in Hamid City, where the bulk of the fighting is concentrated in the eastern parts of the neighborhood. Substantial weaponry was uncovered by the IDF in the last 24 hours, specifically in an apartment that belonged to Hamas operatives. These included mortars, explosive devices, bombs, and RPGs. The IDF reported that a helicopter strike was carried out against the Hamas unit that had participated in the October 7th attack and was held up in an apartment, killing at least 4 Hamas operatives. In the most southern part of the Gaza Strip, in Rafah, Palestinian sources stated today that Salem Jadua Abu Awad, who is an operative of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was assassinated when a drone fired missiles at his car. 8 people were reportedly injured in this attack as well. In addition to that, local sources reported of IDF airstrikes in the al-Mawasi refugee camp. This is very important because this is the main humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip. Since the beginning of the war, the IDF has been signaling that Palestinians should move to the al-Mawasi refugee camp. This is the areas north of Rafah, between Rafah and Deir al-Balah, and this is the first time that an airstrike is reported in this area. According to Palestinian sources, 15 people were killed and dozens were injured in this attack. The IDF did not report specifically about this attack. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. Amidst reports of severe overcrowding in Israel's prisons as a result of the massive amounts of Palestinians that have been arrested in the Gaza Strip as well as in the West Bank since the war began, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu instructed different ministries in Israel today to begin coordinating the creation of holding centers for thousands of prisoners and detainees. Since the war began, some 4,000 Palestinians have been arrested by the IDF, the majority of them in the Gaza Strip, however, some of them in the West Bank as well. And during an interdepartmental government meeting today, estimates were made that throughout 2024, thousands more will be arrested. Reportedly, the overcrowding is starting to create legal problems within Israel's system, and thus the Prime Minister ordered the different agencies to begin preparing more holding centers for thousands more prisoners and detainees. Other news, as protests against Hamas by the Gaza Liberators Movement continues in the Gaza Strip, Hamas published a statement today making clear, and I quote, "Making contact with Israel, including by the heads of families, is a national act of treason. We shall strike with an iron fist against anyone acting against our internal unity in the Gaza Strip, and we will not allow for the imposition of new regulations." So seemingly this is a response to the growing pressure in Israel to develop a civilian governing bodies from local actors in the Gaza Strip. It was already reported in the last several weeks that Israel has begun coordinating with local merchants the entrance of aid to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, and this statement likely indicates that Hamas is fearing this is going to be a growing phenomenon as pressure mounts in Israel to create some sort of local governing bodies. Hamas does not want any Palestinians to think that they can cooperate with Israel and quote-unquote have immunity from Hamas's retribution. Regarding casualties, one IDF soldier was reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 249. There were no injuries of IDF soldiers reported in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers in the Gaza Strip injured since the war began remains 1,474. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 85 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 31,045. 72,654 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and there's still several thousand that are buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 2 more people have died as a result of malnutrition and dehydration in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. This brings the total number of people that have died from these conditions, including both children, babies, and adults, to 25. Other news, the U.S. Central Command reported that a joint paradropping mission of paradropping aid into the northern parts of the Gaza Strip was carried out by the United States and Jordan. Reportedly, this focused primarily in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, however, some of it also made it to the central parts of the Strip. It reportedly included 11,500 meals, as well as shipments of rice, flour, pasta, and canned goods. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, there was a lot of news that came out today regarding the construction of the maritime corridor to allow aid to flow into the Gaza Strip from Cyprus. At first it was reported by senior Israeli officials, and later Prime Minister Netanyahu himself stated that the idea was initially his idea that was proposed to President Biden and later proposed to Cyprus. According to different reports, Netanyahu raised the idea with President Biden already on October 22nd, and by October 31st, this is just when the war was starting, he presented it to the President of Cyprus. I will add that no evidence was given and there was no comment made by the different countries, the United States or Cyprus, about this. It is possible that Netanyahu is making these statements in order to now show that he was not compelled by President Biden to actually agree to this, but rather was his idea initially. Either way, this does help explain why there's been no objections in Israel to this proposal that was now made public by President Biden. In addition to this, it was reported today that Mohammed Dahlan, who is a senior in the Fatah movement, who is in exile in the United Arab Emirates, is also one of the main figures spearheading this maritime corridor. According to reports, Dahlan, who is a close advisor to the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, negotiated some of the deal with Hamas already a month ago in order to ensure that the movement does not veto the plan. It's important to note that Mohammed Dahlan used to be the Palestinian Authority member who was broadly in charge of the Gaza Strip before Hamas won victory in 2006 and he was sent into exile. His name was also mentioned a few months ago as someone who may be brought back into the governing bodies. Reportedly, he's not interested in this. However, the fact that he is still playing a critical role in delivering aid to the Gaza Strip means that he's still making sure that he's involved in politics, and maybe this will signal something regarding his role in the future. Other news, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant toured the coast of Gaza today with the Israeli Navy. He surveyed the initial preparations for the pier that the United States is going to develop and the naval corridor. He added that this process will deliver aid directly to the population of Gaza and thus will contribute to collapsing the Hamas governing apparatus. Other news, Sky News in Arabic reported that a ship carrying humanitarian aid has departed Cyprus today on its way to Gaza already. According to the report, the ship is going to dock in the al-Bida region in the southern parts of Gaza City, that is still in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. This has nothing to do with the establishment of the pier that the United States is going to establish, but it does indicate that the maritime corridor, the idea of delivering aid to the Gaza Strip through the sea, is already up and running. Other news, the Al Arabi news agency published pictures today of equipment that is already being deployed in the Gaza Strip as part of preparations for the maritime corridor. While the report did not state who was organizing the deployment, the images showed dozens of tractors, trucks delivering concrete materials, and things that are very likely could not happen in the Gaza Strip right now, certainly not in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, without at least IDF approval, if not the IDF coordinating and managing the entire operation. Moving on to the West Bank, there's substantial IDF activity reported in several different parts of the West Bank. These include IDF incursions in the areas of Ramallah, Birzeit, the villages of Beita and Salem near Nablus, and Dahaisha refugee camp near Bethlehem. There were no reports both in the major media outlets as well as in social media regarding confrontations that erupted as a result of these incursions. A total of 6 Palestinians were reported arrested by the IDF in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Other news, leading up to Ramadan, which again is due to start tonight, in the Middle East has already started, or in some cases is going to start tomorrow, there's an unprecedented amount of IDF soldiers and police that have been deployed throughout the West Bank. Reportedly, between 23 to 24 IDF battalions are spread out throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and just for some proportions, this is compared to 12 IDF battalions that are currently operating where the war is actually happening in the Gaza Strip. Other news, contrary to the Israeli government's regulations, pictures and videos circulated today of the Israeli border police blocking the entrance of Palestinians from entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Tonight was the first night where there was going to be major prayers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. According to what was at least initially decided by the Israeli government, there were going to be no special restrictions that were imposed on Palestinians' entry to Al-Aqsa Mosque. However, this was also countered by Israel's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was also in charge of the police. A lot of allegations made that seemed that Ben-Gvir may have ordered the police to try to block Palestinians. Remains to be seen. Right now, the first day is not going smoothly with regards to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Other news, the Israeli police and the Shabak arrested 13 Palestinian Israeli citizens in the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours under suspicion of planning a terror attack in support of Hamas. According to the charges, the 13 had spent time in the West Bank and obtained weapons from there and had made contact with Hamas in Gaza in order to receive instructions and guidance. A Palestinian from the West Bank was arrested with the unit as the entire operation was exposed. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were substantial barrages of rockets and missiles fired from Lebanon towards northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. A substantial barrage of over 37 rockets was fired towards the areas of Mount Meron, with rockets landing in Merom Galil as well. Hezbollah stated that dozens of Katyusha missiles were fired as part of this barrage, adding that it was in retaliation to the IDF's attack in Khir Bat-Salem that I reported upon yesterday. In addition to this, there was a barrage of over 30 rockets that was fired towards the Majd el-Shams area near the Israeli Hermon, with al-Mawasi also stating that they fired at IDF outposts in Hardov. Anti-tank missiles were also fired from Hezbollah towards the areas of Malachia. One of them reportedly hit an IDF vehicle, however no casualties were reported. In addition, a Hezbollah drone reportedly crashed in the Hermon area, and Hezbollah, in addition to all this, claimed over 12 border incidents and fire incidents throughout the last 24 hours. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly attacked terror infrastructures in the Ita Sha'ab area, as well as targeting a firing outpost in the Maruna Rasri region and a military structure with Hezbollah operatives in it in the vicinity of Khir Bat-Salem. In addition to this, it was reported that the IDF warplanes attacked a unit that was preparing to fire anti-tank missiles in the Shabar region, and later in the day, airstrikes were also reported in the towns of Kunin and Rashia al-Fahar, with the IDF stating that these were the areas from which the different barrages towards the Hermon and Majd el-Shams were launched earlier in the day. Al-Ahmar also reported, in addition to this, that there were airstrikes that the IDF carried out in the Al-Fardis area. Al-Miaden, which is another Hezbollah affiliate, reported that artillery fire was carried out in the Hasbiya area, and that the IDF carried out an attack in the areas of Al-Habaria, stating that 3 people were killed in the attack who belonged to the Al-Fajr force. The Al-Fajr force, is important to note, is a different organization than Hezbollah. It is the military wing of a movement that is called the Islamic Group, or the Jama'a al-Islamiyah. This group exists in Lebanon for many years. It already fired rockets at Israel already in October 2023 when the war began. They are not that active. However, the fact that they were killed in this IDF attack, according to Al-Manar, states that either they have participated in these barrages or possibly that they have been cooperating with Hezbollah and happened to be caught in the fire that the IDF was retaliating to this area. Regarding casualties from this, Hezbollah announced that of the 4 family members that were killed in Herbat Salem yesterday, 3 of them, the father and 2 sons, were Hezbollah operatives, and that the mother of the family was killed as well, bringing the total number of Hezbollah casualties that the group says have died since the war began to 241. Other news, IDF Arabic spokesperson Avichai Adrei put out an unusual tweet today, stating that he has received many appeals from Lebanese civilians and even from Hezbollah operatives who are fearful that Hezbollah is going to drag Lebanon into a similar fate as that of Gaza. He responded by stating that he is not the address for this, but that he can refer people to the Mossad's page, where they can write in and find the best ways to improve their situation. This is very likely part of a signaling game between the IDF, again trying to issue a warning to Lebanon that Lebanon will see the same fate of Gaza if the situation spirals out of control. It is also possible that people from Lebanon are actually approaching the IDF spokesperson in Arabic. However, I will say that it is very convenient that he happens to be saying people are worried that this is going to be what happens in Gaza, and they could talk to the Mossad instead of to me. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the Houthis published a video today from a large exercise they carried out in the last few days. Codenamed Our Path to Jerusalem, this exercise simulated taking over IDF bases in the southern parts of Israel. Reportedly, it involved large parts of their army and was very speculative, very likely leading up to the month of Ramadan. Moving on to the political and general trends of the last 24 hours, there's ongoing and increasing escalations in the diplomatic collision between President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. After Biden's escalatory rhetoric yesterday, stating that in some ways Netanyahu is doing more harm than good to Israel, Netanyahu today seemingly answered him in a Politico interview. Responding to Biden's statements that Netanyahu is not doing enough to protect Palestinian civilians, Netanyahu stated that the number of civilians killed in the Gaza Strip is much less than the Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting, adding that the IDF has killed at least 13,000 terrorists in Gaza. He stated that more civilians were killed at the beginning of the war as a result of the air bombings and held Hamas accountable for their death, adding that the ratio is 1 to 1.5 civilians killed for every Hamas fighter that is killed. It's noteworthy that while he stated that the number is much less, if you put 1 to 1.5 ratio to 13,000 terrorists that were killed in Gaza, this is not actually that different from the numbers that the Palestinian Health Ministry is putting out. The Palestinian Health Ministry does not distinguish between fighters and civilians, like what Netanyahu was trying to say that while the number is maybe 31,000, 32,000 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, of them 13,000 are fighters or combatants or militants or terrorists, depending who's giving the interview. What is important is that the numbers actually do not contradict. He's simply saying the different framing is 13,000 terrorists that have been killed, and a ratio of 1 to 1.5 for every one of them, a civilian is killed. In addition to this, relating to Biden's statements that Netanyahu is doing harm to Israel, Netanyahu stated that the vast majority of Israelis support his policies and that he is doing what's best for Israel. He added that this support includes destroying Hamas's remaining battalions in Rafah, and this is also seemingly answering President Biden, who said that an invasion of Rafah would be a red line. He stated that once the operation in Rafah begins, it will be a matter of 4 to 6 weeks until the end of the intensive fighting of the war. Amidst this, there was a report today quoting several senior U.S. officials stating that it is very likely that we're going to see a continuous escalation in the White House administration's rhetoric vis-a-vis Netanyahu and the Israeli government in the coming weeks, adding that this will not likely affect weapons transfer or weapons aid to Israel. The officials also stated that there is extreme frustration with Netanyahu in the U.S. administration, specifically noting that the Israeli government's repeated public statements against the Palestinian Authority and a two-state deal, which the officials stated Netanyahu knows are vastly complicate things for the administration. One of the officials is quoted as saying that Biden has done nothing but support Israel for over 150 days of the war at the risk of his own political base, and that it's time for Israel to start showing reciprocity, even if Netanyahu also has his own political base to consider. Possibly related to this frustration, New York Magazine reported today that the White House officials recently approached an expert in the Israeli government, with whom they frequently consult, asking how can Netanyahu's government be pushed into collapsing. All of the sources in this report were anonymous, so it's unclear if it is at all accurate, and if so, who they are referring to. Other political news is ongoing protests in Israel trying to pressure the government to accept a hostage deal. Concurrently, the Tikva Forum, which is a right-wing forum and protest movement in Israel, put out a call for Israel to stop all negotiations and immediately invade Rafah, demanding a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF Chief of Staff. Other political news: the president of the International Red Cross, Mariana Spolaric, met in Qatar with Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh. She stated that the Red Cross calls for urgent protection of all victims of the conflict and emphasized the need for enabling humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip in light of the catastrophic conditions there. She added, and I quote, "The Red Cross continues to call for the immediate release of all hostages. We do not take part in negotiations, but are prepared to facilitate in all humanitarian aspects of a deal between the sides, including the release of any hostage." Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, in his Politico interview, Prime Minister Netanyahu related to the possibility that the United States will recognize a Palestinian state. He stated, and I quote, "The vast majority of Israelis also support my position that we must categorically reject the attempt to impose a Palestinian terror state upon us." He added that most Israelis understand that if we do that, we will return to the October 7th massacre. In addition, he also stated that Israelis agree with his policies that the last thing that should be done is bring the Palestinian Authority, who educates its children for terrorism and funds terrorism, into the Gaza Strip. So again, what we're seeing is the growing collision between the vision of Prime Minister Netanyahu, what is going to be the future of the Gaza Strip, and the Biden administration. And as these top senior sources in the United States government predicted, we are likely to see this rhetoric escalating and the collision growing as the election year in the United States develops. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to subscribe, give them a like. If you want to know when reports come out, turn on notifications. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.